Los Angeles International Airport was alive with its usual rhythm, suitcases rolling, hurried announcements echoing, and passengers rushing to their gates. Among the crowd, a man dressed in simple, well-worn jeans and a casual black jacket stood in the first-class line. He carried a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his calm demeanor setting him apart from the anxious travelers around him. His name? Keanu Reeves. Keanu had never been one to flaunt his fame. He preferred solitude, quiet observation, and meaningful encounters over the glitz and glamour that often followed him. Today, he was on his way to New York for a private event. The first-class line moved steadily, but Keanu remained patient, taking in the scene with a quiet appreciation. A few feet behind him, another man entered the line. Unlike Keanu, his presence commanded immediate attention. His suit was perfectly tailored, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and his confidence radiated in every step. He held his boarding pass lightly between his fingers, barely acknowledging those around him. He was Denzel Washington. Denzel, a legend in his own right, had always been a force to be reckoned with. His acting career spanned decades, and he had earned the respect of Hollywood and fans worldwide. Yet, in contrast to Keanu's quiet nature, Denzel carried an aura of authority that made people instinctively straighten their posture in his presence. As fate would have it, there was one more passenger in the line, one who would soon turn this flight into an unforgettable experience. She stood just behind Denzel, dripping in luxury from head to toe. Her expensive perfume lingered in the air, and her oversized sunglasses covered most of her face. She wore a designer dress that looked more suited for a red carpet than an airport. Her name was Victoria Kensington, and she had no patience for anything that did not meet her impossibly high standards. Victoria sighed dramatically as she glanced at the passengers ahead of her. Her lips curled into a disapproving smirk as she eyed Keanu's casual attire. Then, her gaze shifted to Denzel, and her expression softened, only slightly. "Excuse me," she said loudly, turning to her assistant. "First class used to have certain expectations. It's a shame they let just anyone in nowadays." The words weren't whispered. They were meant to be heard. Keanu, hearing the remark, gave a small, knowing smile but remained silent. Denzel, however, shifted slightly, his sharp eyes flicking toward Victoria, though he said nothing, for now. The line moved forward, and soon, all three were inside the first-class lounge. Victoria found a plush seat and made sure her designer handbag had a chair of its own. Meanwhile, Keanu took a seat by the window, watching planes take off in the distance. Denzel, ever the professional, adjusted his cufflinks and pulled out a book, seemingly unbothered by Victoria's words. Or so it seemed. Little did Victoria know that this flight was about to redefine her understanding of true class. As the first-class passengers boarded the plane, the tension from the lounge carried into the cabin. Keanu Reeves quietly found his seat near the window, placing his duffel bag in the overhead compartment before settling in with a book. Across the aisle, Denzel Washington adjusted his seat, glancing around with the trained awareness of someone who always paid attention to his surroundings. Then came Victoria Kensington. She moved with the poise of a queen surveying her domain, her designer handbag occupying a seat before she even took hers. As she turned, her gaze landed on Keanu, and her lips curled into an unimpressed smirk. "Oh," she said, loud enough for those around her to hear. "You again." Keanu looked up, offering her the same polite smile he had given back in the lounge. "Me again." Victoria sighed dramatically, then turned her attention to Denzel. Unlike Keanu, he commanded her respect, or at least, so she thought. "Finally," she said, addressing him. "Someone who understands class. I assume you agree with me that first class should have certain standards." Denzel's sharp eyes locked onto hers, unreadable yet intense. He let a moment pass before responding. "You know," he said smoothly, "I've traveled all over the world. Sat next to all kinds of people. You learn real quick that class isn't something you can buy." Victoria stiffened, caught off guard by his directness. A few passengers nearby were already paying attention, sensing an interesting conversation unfolding. Unfazed, she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if offering a piece of wisdom. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Washington. Class isn't just about money. It's about exclusivity. First class is for people who belong here." She shot a glance at Keanu's casual attire. "Not charity cases." Keanu, still reading his book, let out a small chuckle, shaking his head slightly. Denzel, however, leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. "Let me ask you something," he said, his voice still calm but carrying weight. "What exactly do you think makes someone belong?" Victoria smiled condescendingly, as if indulging a naive question. "It's simple. Success. Refinement. Presence." She gestured vaguely at herself, as if she embodied all three. Denzel nodded slowly, as if considering her words. Then, with that same commanding tone that had captivated audiences for decades, he spoke. "Success. I've met janitors who raised families on minimum wage. Parents who sacrificed everything for their kids. That's success. Refinement. I've seen men in $3,000 suits treat waiters like garbage and guys in t-shirts leave $1,000 tips. And presence? Lady, presence isn't how you walk into a room, it's how people feel when you leave it." A murmur ran through the cabin. A few passengers nodded in quiet approval. Even the flight attendants, who had been pretending not to listen, stole quick glances at Victoria. She blinked, her confidence shaken. But she wasn't about to back down. "I suppose that's a nice sentiment," she said, forcing a smile. "But let's be realistic. Some of us have worked incredibly hard to enjoy this level of luxury." Denzel leaned forward slightly. "And you think others haven't?" "Well, Keanu finally looked up from his book, setting it down on the tray table. His voice was softer than Denzel's, but no less powerful. "I think what Denzel's saying," he said, "is that life has a way of humbling people who think they're above everyone else." Silence hung in the air. Victoria's carefully curated image was unraveling, and she knew it. But before she could say anything else, the flight attendant arrived with the pre-flight drink service. "Mr. Reeves, Mr. Washington, would you like anything?" Keanu smiled. "Just water, thanks." Denzel gestured for the same. When the attendant turned to Victoria, she hesitated. For the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. Finally, she let out a small, breathless laugh and said, "Make mine a double." As the flight prepared for takeoff, Keanu and Denzel exchanged knowing glances. The lesson wasn't over yet. The plane soared through the sky, cruising at 30,000 feet. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, but the tension from earlier still lingered. Victoria Kensington sat stiffly in her seat, occasionally glancing at Keanu Reeves and Denzel Washington. She was no longer making passive-aggressive comments, but her silence spoke volumes. A flight attendant passed by, offering refills. Denzel declined, still sipping his water. Keanu did the same, offering a polite smile. When the attendant turned to Victoria, she hesitated before waving them off. She wasn't thirsty. She was stewing. After a long moment, she turned toward Denzel. "I must admit," she said carefully, "you have a way with words." Denzel met her gaze. "That's what I do." Victoria inhaled deeply, choosing her next words with caution. "You said earlier that success isn't about money. That real presence is how people feel when you leave the room." Denzel nodded. "Well," she continued, folding her hands neatly in her lap, "what if I told you that people feel envy when I leave? That they wish they could have what I have?" Keanu let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "That's not presence. That's just making noise." Victoria narrowed her eyes. "Oh. And what exactly do you two know about me? Denzel glanced at Keanu before answering. We know enough. She scoffed, crossing her arms. You think I'm shallow? That I don't understand struggle? Keanu shrugged. Maybe. Victoria pursed her lips, glancing out the window as if debating something. Then, she sighed and turned back. For the record, she said quietly, I wasn't always like this. Denzel raised an eyebrow. No. Victoria shook her head. I didn't grow up rich. I had to fight for my place. I had to prove myself. And when I finally got to where I am, I told myself I'd never go back. Keanu studied her for a moment before speaking. So, you built yourself up. But in the process, you started looking down on others? Victoria exhaled sharply. I don't look down on others. Denzel smirked. Could have fooled us. She hesitated. Keanu leaned in slightly. Look, I get it. You worked hard to get where you are. You don't want to lose it. But here's the thing, being at the top doesn't mean stepping on the people below you. It means reaching back and helping them up. Victoria looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Denzel added, you want to know what real class is? It's treating the janitor the same way you treat the CEO. It's knowing that no matter how high you climb, you're never too good to be kind. The words hung in the air. For the first time, Victoria didn't have a snarky remark. A soft ding signaled the captain's announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. As the plane began its descent, Victoria remained deep in thought. By the time they landed, she had made a decision. As Keanu and Denzel stood to grab their bags, Victoria hesitated, then turned to them. I owe you both an apology, she said quietly. I wasn't at my best today. Keanu smiled. Happens to the best of us. Denzel nodded. It's what you do next that matters. Victoria swallowed her pride and extended a hand. Thank you, for the lesson. Keanu shook her hand first, followed by Denzel. As they exited the plane, passengers whispered among themselves, reflecting on what they had witnessed. One man in the back, who had remained silent the entire flight, pulled out his phone and tweeted. You can buy a first-class ticket, but you can't buy class itself. Hashtag Keanu Reeves, hashtag Denzel Washington. It went viral. And for the first time in a long time, Victoria Kensington realized, she didn't need admiration. She needed change.